It's time to jump into another game that was sat on my wishlist. Today we're going to be diving into the story from a newly released indie horror game titled Indika. Indika is set in an alternate version of Russia during the late 1800s. It follows the titular character, Indika, a young nun who embarks on a journey of self-discovery alongside a companion, and is an interesting look at faith and the questions that arise in one's mind in regard to belief. It was a truly wacky game at times and was full of dark humour. Either way, it was a really cool game which I actually thoroughly enjoyed. That's all I'll say for an intro, but before we dive in, please be aware that there will be spoilers in this video for Indika. It's the late 19th century and Indika, a nun, snaps out of a hallucination while surrounded by her fellow nuns. She causes a massive scene and everyone there is shocked but not surprised, as this is something that Indika does a lot. Pleading her case and saying that she didn't mean to cause a scene, she's ejected from the building and is told to collect a basket from the warehouse for someone called Smaragda. As Indika makes her way to the warehouse, she hears the voice of a strange companion talking about her destiny. This companion is the devil. In the warehouse, Indika takes the basket of potatoes off of another nun called Stesha. On the way to Smaragda, Indika is tormented by the devil again, which reminds her that none of the nuns really like her, that they feel disgust for her. She gets to Smaragda with the potatoes and doesn't even get a thank you. Indika is then ordered to draw water from the well and to decant it into a barrel by the door. She does this, requiring multiple trips, but after she's finished, another nun callously pulls the water away, saying that the sisters won't eat the potatoes after it was Indika that drew the water. They suggest a different nun draws the water instead. Later, during communion, Indika sees something bizarre. She causes a scene again. This time they've had enough. Indika is given another task to deliver a letter. This is a surprise for Indika, as she's not actually been permitted to leave the convent for an entire year. Outside, Indika holds the letter and makes her way through the freezing snow and bitter winds outside. She arrives at a small ferry crossing and knocks on the door of the ferry operator, Tisha, but there's no response. The animals are causing a stir, but Tisha pipes up and says that they feel the unholiness of Indika, of course. Indika says that she needs to hurry to the train. Without Tisha's help, Indika has to improvise, but eventually makes it across the river onto the other side. Walking through a dark cave, Indika experiences something odd. The devil speaks, tormenting her, and this causes her to see the world differently, and only by praying can she make the environment return to normal again. Eventually, she's able to exit the cave and she emerges back into the open again. Shortly after this, Indika is almost shot by a very jumpy man, and she comes across a horrid sight. A train has crashed from the bridge above, causing a nobleman to become impaled on something. The men with him are trying to ease his passing. The doctor explains that the train was full of convicts, and the convicts placed a spring between the carriages whilst the train was moving and tried to mount an escape. Many of the convicts were shot. The man tells the nun to go with them to the station as all the wounded from the train are there. The train begins to sink, so Indika is separated from the men. Crossing and traversing perilous terrain and derelict buildings, Indika makes it to a small graveyard and then to a small village. Walking down the path, she hears a woman screaming, and inside a house, she witnesses a woman being assaulted. Indika makes a sound and hides in the toilet. A demon's hand grabs her shoulder and she falls out of the door, and the man is about to assault her, but then another man comes in and knocks the attacker out. He then leaves. Going after him, the man wants Indika to be quiet, to stop talking. Indika learns that the man's name is Ilya. The men from the crash site are there and Ilya seems to want to avoid them. Ilya is identified as an escaped convict. Ilya shoots one of them and a standoff takes place. Since his arm is messed up, Ilya demands Indika ride the bike. As she rides it down the hill, the remaining man chases them, but Ilya eventually shoots him to stop him pursuing them. After losing him, Indika injects Ilya with morphine to help his pain. He wants to take the guitar with him, but Indika doesn't let him take it. She jumps back on board the bike. During their ride, Ilya tells Indika that he's surprised she knows how to operate the bike, to which she responds that she grew up in a bike shop as her father sold them. During the ride, the devil teases Indika, telling her that she's been waiting to be so close to a man. The devil gets more and more crass, saying Ilya is just like the men that Indika imagines while she's in her room. This goes on until Indika tells the devil to stop. Going down a hill, they're thrown from the bike. Knocked out but coming to, Indika spots Ilya's arm, which seems to be very bad, as if it's dead or dying. Indika says that they need to amputate it or he will not survive. Ilya then comments that the prison doctor told him the same thing. He explains that he's been talking to God. He claims that God showed him some events, and that every event has happened as he was told it would, including the train crash. Ilya claims it's all part of God's plan. Indika almost mocks Ilya's encounter with God. Anyway, they arrive in a small village which is home to a paint factory which was abandoned after an explosion. Their passage is blocked, so getting off the bike, Indika heads through the houses and finds a way to move the blockage. She finds a wrench and Ilya uses it to remove the obstruction. They hear a dog barking. Ilya says he hates them, and we're about to see why. And this dog is absolutely massive. They run and find refuge inside a building. Indika asks Ilya that if he's God's chosen one, why didn't he heal him straight away? In response, he hands Indika a flyer for something called the Kujets, located at the Temple of John of Damascus, with the Kujets being a potential healing for what's going on with his arm. Indika continues to sow doubt into the mind of Ilya about how much power God truly has. Indika hosts Ilya up, but he doesn't return, so Indika has to find another way out of the building. On her way up the stairs, the devil says that Indika likes Ilya, which she objects to, and then she remembers that she needs to deliver her letter to the Danilov ministry. She almost forgot all about her duty. The devil tries to get her to read the letter, but Indika refuses. However, at the top, she gives in and reads the letter. The environment shifts around her again. The devil got his way and got her to read it. She discovers that she's being defrocked. That means she's being kicked out of the convent. Making her way through the devil's schemes, Indika leaves the building and reconvenes with Ilya. In her mind, Indika started to give thoughts to the Kujets that it would solve her problems, that it would make the voice inside her disappear, and she could then return to the monastery. They cross an icy body of water and aim for the stairs on the other side, but their friend, the dog, is back, and it dives into the water. Inside the factory, they find an elevator, and after they get it working, they ascend. Walking across a plank, Indika is chased by the dog. After evading it multiple times, she's able to make it back to Ilya, who helps her up. The dog's head got caught in the machinery, killing it. They arrive at the train station and crossing the yard, they get to a bridge and spot a train approaching, and they jump onto it. Safely on board, they eventually arrive at the Spazov fish factory, and the temple is visible in the distance. Ilya says that the factory will be empty this time, and he says that his mother used to work at the fish factory. Entering into the factory, they work their way through the various hazards, having discussions about faith and life. They end up getting knocked into the water and have to go somewhere with heat in order to keep warm and dry their soaking clothes. They have an interesting conversation about how the dean at the monastery walks around at night, checking up on the nuns, and Ilya mentions that the wardens did the exact same thing at the prison, which makes Indika think. When their clothes are dry, they continue on, and Ilya finds another guitar and picks it up but cannot play it because of his arm. Continuing on, they spot the fish. They are huge. They make their way through the rest of the factory. Ilya says that he's hidden something somewhere in the factory, and getting to it, it's a couple of finger puppets. Indika sings and they create shadows with their finger puppets, but Ilya passes out and falls down the hole. Indika goes after him, but she drops the medicine. With no other option and with Ilya dying, she spots a chopping machine and she makes the decision to amputate his arm. Indika, after that harrowing ordeal, lights up one of Ilya's cigarettes. Ilya wakes up and freaks out about his arm being, gone. He says that Indika went against God's plan. He accuses her of not believing in God's plan from the start. He says that God doesn't talk to him anymore, not since he met Indika, so he grabs his arm and he leaves. Indika then has to find her way out of the factory herself. She feels a stab of doubt. She finds her way outside and she's close to the temple. She makes her way through the city and spots another huge dog, but this one is sleeping. She meets up with Ilya again, who is holding the letter Indika was supposed to deliver. He read it. Walking into a building, Indika finds herself in a strange room. It resembles a cube, and she spots something disturbing. She sees herself, but as a demonic entity. She has to manipulate the environment in order to get to Ilya and to escape the room, and she eventually manages to do so. They push on through the city, and after some destruction, they make it to the cathedral. However, they are too late, as the event is over with it being the final day of the event. The Kujets is to be moved to a place called Nalovitsky. Indika tells the priest that Ilya escaped from prison to seek out the miracle. Naturally, this goes as well as you'd expect it to. Despite Indika being certain that the priest would not break the seal of confession, the priest gets some guards. Ilya tussles with the priest, and it results in Indika being struck in the face by the priest. Ilya grabs the priest and a shot rings out, and the guard has actually shot the priest by mistake. Taking his opportunity, Ilya heads for the Kujets. He desperately tries to reattach his arm and prays for God to perform a miracle by healing his arm. That miracle does not come, and hurting, Ilya takes the Kujets and escapes the church. Indika, on the other hand, is arrested and is led through an area by the two guards and is locked inside a cell, and the guard tells Indika that she'll likely get hanged. She says that if he lets her go, she'll repay him with whatever he wants. The guard, at first at least, wants her to sing. he unlocks the door, and Indika is forced to satisfy the guard. She has a vision of falling far, far down into a red abyss alongside the horrific entity. To the guard, he reveals that he lied and he won't let her go at all. She looks up and sees the demon attack the guard. However, when she walks away, it turns out it's a wardrobe that has fallen on top of him. With Indika now free, she walks through the city and she eventually comes across a drunk Ilya. Turns out he sold the kudyets and bought a rusty old trombone. He says that he mastered the guitar and now it's time to master something else. Indika goes into the pawn shop and demands the kudyets. She looks into the mirror and sees the demon instead of herself. Looking inside the kudyets, there's nothing inside. It's empty and bottomless. Looking up, the demon is gone. Indika gets up and walks out of the store. The game then ends, but we've got a bit to speculate on and discuss here, so let's start by discussing Indika's past. Indika's past is seen through sections which depict various scenarios that defined her life leading up to becoming a nun. As she mentioned during the bike ride with Ilya, Indika grew up around bikes, as her father Pavel sold them from his shop in a place called Gorodishi. They'd race the bikes around their village from time to time. One day though, Indika's father's bike broke down and Indika was tasked with going to grab tools from his workshop. Getting there, a man is there. His name is Mirko. Mirko is a traveller. He tells Indika that her bike wouldn't even make 10 versts, which is just over 1 kilometer per hour. Indika says that the bike could easily do 50 versts, so Mirko wants to try it, but he ends up stealing the bike. Time passes and Indika's father returns. Sometime later, Indika is in bed at night and her father comes to her room. He says that a man named Sava Ilyich is due to arrive the following day and will make a proposal of marriage to Indika. A rock flies into Indika's window and a message is attached. Someone writes that it's a starry night and that whoever he is waiting for her on the roof. Indika leaves via her window and makes her way up the building and to the roof. The man who waiting for her is Mirko. Indika asks him where her bike is, but he responds that something happened. Calling him a thief, Indika goes to leave. But Mirko starts playing a flute, saying that he wrote the tune the night he met her. She stays and sits with him on the roof, and the two grow close. Mirko takes Indika to a lake and they make each other a deal. If Indika can make it to the other side of the lake without wetting her skirt, Mirko has to teach her how to play the flute. If she does get her skirt wet, then Indika has to kiss Mirko. So she attempts to cross. Getting to the end, Mirko throws Indika into the lake and jumps in too. Then Indika makes a mistake. Her and Mirko end up sleeping together. She's full of regret and says she's due to get married, but Mirko says that she should run away with him to the city. He'll leave his tribe. Mirko says he'll get a job, but says they can steal money from Indika's father to help them get started. Naturally, Indika objects, but she reluctantly hands over the key to the register in the shop. Mirko goes down there and is caught in the act, leading to Indika's father chasing him round the store. Outside the shop, Mirko is confronted by the father. Indika's father has a shotgun, and he asks Indika if she knows Mirko. She denies knowing him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Similar to how Peter denied Jesus 3 times in the Bible. Then, Indika's father shoots and kills Mirko. It's very likely that Indika started struggling mentally after this point, crippled by guilt, so her father likely sought help for Indika at the monastery. So, Indika didn't exactly choose to go to the monastery, but she wasn't exactly forced either. She likely saw it as a way to atone for her sins and her guilt. As we see in the game, she was eventually seen as a black sheep at the monastery. For example, one of the punishments was that after she burned the phalonion of the priest, Father Sergei, the phalonion being the liturgical vestment worn over his garments, her hair was cut by the prioress. In a word, I'd call this game weird. But let's look at what message I think the game was trying to convey. Now, when it comes to religion and spirituality, one of the devil's goals is to lead people away from their faith, away from God. And in the case of this story, what better way to do that than to have Indika ostracized from the convent? She's on her own. What is shown as the world splitting is likely a representation of her trying to fight back against the devil beside her. During these moments, the devil would describe how Indika hates religious monotony, the constant prayers that were repeated so much that they had lost all meaning to her. The devil is a mere representation of her doubt, her insecurity and her fears. Something that we all go through. At one point, the devil talks about sin and how sin is seen as sin regardless of its real world weight. For example, committing a murder is a single sin, as is stealing or lying. There's no scale to determine one more serious than another. These are obviously issues that Indika has wrestled with. This exact internal dilemma inside her at this point of the game came from a simple temptation in her mind to read the letter Indika was meant to deliver. There's another moment when Ilya shows Indika something at the fish factory. A starry effect. Ilya imagines it to be something heavenly or miraculous, but Indika straight away comes up with a rational explanation, saying it's a stroboscope effect, like looking through a bike wheel. And this clearly deflates Ilya. When it comes to Indika, there's one point in the game where she's talking about choices and the soul, that someone's soul gravitates towards God and someone else's does not. She questions whether or not that is a choice made by the soul or the individual with that soul, and she ponders whether that choice is in fact pure chance instead. She questions how much freedom people who follow God actually have, if in the end, when it comes to true salvation, God is only satisfied with a set of strictly defined choices anyway. She finishes by saying that God could have just made her in a way that he would have liked her to be. And I think therein lies the issue. Indika struggles with her faith in that she wants to believe, to be closer to God if you will, but she can't seem to be able to believe wholeheartedly. With Indika specifically, the devil beside her and inside her head was more likely a hallucination and the result of mental illness after the death of Mirko and how she betrayed him and got him killed. This is best seen with the scene in the cell. Indika sees the guard being attacked by the demon when it was actually the wardrobe that had fallen onto the guard. So we also see Indika's questions around her own faith with Ilya. His being God's chosen one prompts so many questions from Indika. She's wondering why God would choose Ilya, a convict. Now, whether or not you think Ilya really did hear from God, or whether this was just a result of him being very sick, Ilya claims he saw God's plan, and I guess this included a vision where he still had his arm and could play guitar. But Indika cut off his arm while he was passed out, and this probably crushed Ilya, and after this he saw Indika as ruining God's plan, which is why Ilya was so deflated after losing his arm. He was a gifted musician, and that was now gone. Ilya's whole purpose was getting to that cathedral in order to heal his affliction in a way that medicine could not. But Indika made all that futile. He tried to hold on to God's plan for him, even so much as taking the arm with him to the cathedral. His hope was that even with the arm severed, it could be healed by the Kudyets. When he escapes the church, Ilya takes the Kudyets, and we're made to think that he still believes that God's plan is for him to have his arm back. But he ends up throwing his arm at the guards to try and get away. He'd already lost faith in God's plan at this point, and was of course going to sell the Kudyets to buy an instrument he could play with one arm. Ilya, during their time in one of the buildings, says that it's not about his arm, but it's about the journey, about following God's path. But his actions in trying to have his arm reattached in the cathedral shows us that this was 100% about his arm, and his ability to continue to play music. Music was Ilya's life, pretty much. Me, personally, I think that it seems that Ilya was hallucinating, as when injected with medicine he stops hearing God. But let me know what you think below. At the end of the game, we see that Indika's faith is hanging by a thread. The points Indika can earn by doing things that are viewed as religious chores are basically useless points. Pointless tasks, if you like. They increase standing in the eyes of religion, sure, but as we see, all those points are lost during Indika's time with the guard in the cell. The game even tells us that the points are worthless. We also see that when Indika shakes the Kudyets and earns points, she is trying to earn back the points she'd just lost after being violated by the guard. She'd look up and she'd still see the devil in the mirror. We then see that Indika opens up the Kudyets and it's empty. It's bottomless. With her faith all but destroyed, Indika did not believe in God anymore, so therefore there was no devil for her to believe in. She was just there, alone. Whatever sinews of faith that were hanging by a thread were now broken, and she'd lost her faith. And finally, and completely unrelated, it's possible that since this is an alternate Russia, a parallel, the animals being big is completely normal. The dogs and the fish, and the pigs, being prime examples. This game was down to player interpretation really, but that is it for this video. If you enjoyed this one, then please leave a like and subscribe if you aren't already. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, but for now, take care, and I will see you in the next one.